Welcome back to another episode of The Wrong Idea. In case you're unfamiliar, being wrong is about embracing subjective experience over objective truth. We're not interested in being correct, we just want to explore our own insights and opinions. I'm Lucas, here with my brother Jack, and we are in our second episode of belief systems, our deep dive into belief systems. We're thinking about how we create belief systems. And in our last episode, if you haven't already listened, we thought a little bit about where beliefs come from, what beliefs are, and why they should matter to us. Here, we're going to follow up and go deeper and understand how these belief systems are created and how we can be intentional when we create belief systems. What do you think about that, Jack?
I think it's perfect. I think that first episode is incredibly important because it sets a good foundation for what we want to do here. I think that you need to have the answer to those, three questions of, sort of like what are they, what do we use them for, and why do we care, in order to have a good way to be, like you said, intentional about what we're doing. And I think our goal here is to try and give the people some good methods to not only maybe try and create their own belief system or, evaluate their own beliefs, but, something to build off of. I think that's the whole point.
Perfect. Well, when we start thinking about this notion of creating a belief system, the first question that comes to my mind is sort of, where do beliefs come from? And I think there's a lot of ways to go about answering this question, but let me remind you of the definition I gave at the end of our last episode. I'd like to think of beliefs as rules or heuristics that we apply to the world in order to help us make decisions. In other words, we look for patterns in reality and we match those against predefined rules that we've configured, these beliefs, and then we act in the world based on how those patterns evaluate according to those rules. In other words, if these conditions match, then we will behave this way.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I always love that definition from the moment you said it until now. I've had it popping through my mind. But I think that one of the things that you should look at when you're thinking of how your beliefs form is the people around you. I think that's an aspect that comes to my mind quickly because as you're going through any experience, it's impossible to not get the either feedback, input, whatever from the people who are around you at the time. They don't have to, be there exactly with you. Maybe it's a family member or friend that you tell about whatever happened after. You're going to get their take on it. And that will inherently sway whatever your initial reaction was based on what you believe. So your beliefs, I think, end up forming as sort of just a result of the results of how other people, react to things around you. Because, you know, innately, your reactions are a result of their reactions and vice versa. So I think a lot of people's beliefs form sort of from seeing how other people, have reactions and make decisions because it will sort of inform whatever it is that you want to be believing in the first place.
Okay, you've got me going on a track here, which is you were focusing a lot on the external factors. And so this makes me think that maybe beliefs form in sort of two fundamental ways, internal and external. And in internal, I'm thinking of as sort of innate predispositions, the things that we are naturally drawn to, whereas external inputs are sort of the feedback and the mechanism by which we accept stimulus and build beliefs from the outside. So I think in that way we have two different directions where those beliefs could start within us and then go out into the world and be tested, and then that external input can come back and feed back in and help build new beliefs from there. So there's kind of inside out and outside in.
Right? They both need each other. Like I think that one of the things that would come to my mind is like, well, you're going to have sort of an innate predisposition as to how balance feels to you. And an external input is going to be, did I eat shit leaning more than 45 degrees on my bike? And eventually if you try something enough times, then you're going to start to recognize a pattern and eventually that'll, sort of give you your outside feedback and then your inside sort of innate belief and then you'll sort of, get your more concrete belief. It's like, well, the balance on my bike when I'm doing said thing is going to feel like this, So That's my like concrete real world example that comes to my mind, right?
I mean, I like what you say a lot there, especially because I think you naturally came back to that notion of pattern recognition. Whenever we experience something multiple times, usually like 2 or 3 times, honestly, can be enough to help to really start to build a belief. What's the old saying? It's like, oh man, I'm blanking on it. Once is surprising, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. The point being, we develop a rule based on just a few repetitions. At least humans, and the reality is we kind of need to survive. We might need to be able to learn even just from a single example of something. But the more that we see it, the more we start to buy into that as a rule we can use without having to back it up. And that brings me somewhere else. But before we get there, I want to focus on what I was just saying for a second about experiences confirming beliefs that exist. So we might see something once and develop a belief about it, and we might come to a similar set of circumstances and see the same outcome, and then that confirms the belief that we formed the first time. In other words, the same outcome leads to the same result, and we see, aha, now I can apply this rule more generally. But we have to be very careful about things like confirmation bias, which is essentially this, when we see something, when we're looking to confirm the belief we already have, we're looking for evidence to prove us right, as opposed to looking at the evidence objectively and trying to see what it's really trying to tell us, rather than being focused on what we're predisposed to believe based on what we've already seen. Sometimes it's useful, but that's exactly where the bias can come from, is being looking to prove that you're right.
We talked about this in a previous episode. I can't remember which one it was, but you like popped this idea on me, and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense for what I was thinking about because I'd never heard the term formalized. But it can definitely lead you to fall into traps because there's, like you said, it can be a useful thing, but it can also be a negative thing if you've had a whole bunch of, you know, experiences to back up and reinforce a belief that is negative and hampers you, and it's kind of hard to break that cycle from whatever it was. Then your confirmation bias is going to sort of work against you. However, if maybe you've broken one of those bad beliefs that you have, and you've sort of started to form something new, something a little more useful and helpful. I can't think of something off the top of my head, but your confirmation bias will then start to aid you in whatever it is, because it's obviously something which is helping you, so you're going to start to see the benefits of it. And obviously there should be a level of objectivity that you take when looking at anything. You should never just, oh, I've had a Y thing happen before, so it's got to be this. You've got to take a step back in all situations, and I think that's a lot of what helps with getting feedback from other people. To me, it sort of comes into this idea of like, you suck at looking at your own problems, but you can give incredible advice. There was some saying about it, like you've got two nostrils above your own mouth, but you can't tell when your own breath smells. And it's like, yeah, you've got your own biases and whatnot, and so do other people. And I think it's, can you take it out of yours and try and put it into someone else's, and then, maybe take some sort of blend of those two to try and get as close to an objective view as you can.
Totally. I think this brings to mind even one layer further of not just cognitive or confirmation bias, but of notion of cognitive dissonance. This notion that when we are faced with information that conflicts with what we already believe, it doesn't always feel very good, and which makes us prone to try to resolve that conflict in our head. We might try to change our interpretation, like reinterpret the information we're getting in a way that fits sort of the framework that we've already developed, because oftentimes it's easier to reinterpret data based on a model that already exists than it is to sort of change that your own mental model. And that's so, like, it can be a good thing, because if your mental model has to change all the time to handle any new data that comes in, like that's tricky, and that could be problematic. You want to be able to interpret data effectively based on your model of the world, but you have to be careful that you're not doing that to the extent where you're interpreting data that doesn't fit your model and just trying to shoehorn it in to make it work, because you don't want to believe that maybe something about your model is ineffective.
I think it's going to come back to having an open mind and sort of being able to, bend whatever your framework is, in the sense of not trying to bend your own to make it fit, but like, change it a little. If you got to knock down a wall and, you know, maybe combine two rooms, or you gotta break into the neighbor's apartment or whatever, and then start taking their stuff and see how angry they get. You're gonna have to rework all your stuff, and I think that your this is something that I think we also had reached back to, is that your belief systems need to be dynamic as you grow as a person, and as you have more experiences. They're always going to change. I saw a clip on the internet at one point of Trevor Noah talking about how if you talk to people, they are different, who speak multiple languages. They're different people in those different languages, because your personality forms in those languages based upon the person that you are at the time. And I think that's an interesting notion to come across. As you go throughout life and you experience different things, you're going to have different beliefs based upon what you've experienced. And taking that perspective from learning a language, I've been learning Spanish for a little while, and I am now going to have to try and take some time back to think about how I am as a person when I speak Spanish. But do you feel any sort of relation to that when you think about the type of person that you are when you speak Japanese? Because obviously you spent a long time learning that language.
Yeah, I mean, I'm nowhere near fluent in Japanese, so like I don't know that I would be able to reflect very well on that. But what comes to mind is sort of where I wanted to go, anyways. Sort of this notion of, I think I mentioned it already, but a belief that we can just kind of accept as truth, something that we don't have to question, that we can just a rule that we can just apply, and it doesn't have anything backing it up necessarily, but it's like we just trust that this is the way things are, because we have to have some assumptions. We have to make some assumptions about the world in order to operate, and those assumptions, may not have evidence to back them up, or in the sense of like they may not be built on top of other ideas. They are the core beliefs, the foundation of what we believe. And I think that what you're talking about is sort of a similar thing, where because we often express our beliefs in language, and the a language is going to have its own biases about the way that it talks about the world, we I could definitely see us very easily forming beliefs about the world in those words, literally the words of that language, and how there would be core beliefs in any of those languages, and those would be the bedrock for our belief system. And sure, you might translate a belief from one language to another, but I guess my point is, I could definitely see how beliefs could form in one language that are different in some sense than beliefs in another language, and we might act differently as a result, because our thought processes are different, because they're sort of operating on different foundational principles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the terms that you had said here, which I want to hark on a little more, is you said concrete, beliefs that you just take as the truth. They're your sort of like core beliefs. To me, those are like more of the ones that you like form as a kid. Like if you, I go back to, I said maybe you fall over on your bike. And it's like you're gonna believe, okay, maybe you're riding your bike in the snow as like a little kid, and then you fall over. We don't have snow here, but if you do, maybe that core belief is like riding bikes in the snow is more likely to lead you to crash and break your arm. But for whatever purpose there may be, you always need to have some level of skepticism. And I think having a healthy level of skepticism is something that everybody learns to balance, because if you just question everything, then you're just going to live yourself in a horrible loop in life of trying to figure out the perfect answer for everything. And it obviously beliefs are just going to change. So the perfect answer at one time may not be the same as the perfect belief in another. But having beliefs which you can take towards trying to question things, if maybe you've started to see a pattern get broken. We had talked about patterns that you recognize. I think that if there's a pattern that you've seen start to get broken, you need to be able to question those things, because without a good way to try and better your beliefs, improve them, change them, or whatever, I think you're going to become a pretty stuck person, and I think you're going to run into a lot of problems, right?
Well, so I think that you're on the right track in the sense that, of course, the early phase of our life is going to form our core beliefs, our founding beliefs. But I would I would say that I don't necessarily like. I think my core beliefs have definitely changed as I've gotten older, and maybe it's because I do a lot of introspection, and I'm sure that there are plenty of people who form their beliefs at a young age and don't do a lot of growing or thinking in these areas and just rely on the beliefs that they formed when they were young and hope that those will get them through life, you know, thereafter. But I still think of core beliefs more in terms of where they sit in the structure, and meaning that they are the foundation. They are the things that do not have other beliefs backing them up. They are the axioms, the things that we take as canon. And in that sense, yes, they are foundational, and they many of them will have come from childhood. But I think that I myself, for example, have changed a number of my core beliefs, and what I would consider even the core beliefs that I have right now probably all came from reflecting on my beliefs over time. And like I think that I don't let me say it this way. I don't think I had the core beliefs that I have now when I was young.
That's a fair point. I think that as you say it, it makes perfect sense that you're not going to have the same core beliefs throughout your entire life. I'm still super young, and I haven't had a whole lot of time to see those core beliefs change yet. I'm sure they will, and I think that being able to recognize that they should change is something that I think a lot of people will get stuck on. I think that a lot of people tend to hang on to old beliefs that they have because they're comfortable. And of course, people are uncomfortable with change. It's something that people, I shouldn't say all people, most people don't like change. We were talking to a friend of mine about this a couple of days ago. He's having a really hard time breaking up with his current girlfriend, and basically we ended up telling him it's because you don't like change and you're afraid of the change. And he's like, yeah, you're kind of right. But I think more so than, just you change as a person, the world around you changes. Is you go from someone in, like me, will be in about a couple of years' time, a person in high school to a person in college, then to a person out in the world, spit out into the real world. You're gonna have completely different things around you, completely different circumstances, different people above you and below you and alongside you. So I think that being able to have those beliefs be dynamic and informed depending upon where you are is incredibly important to living a life which is you know true to yourself as a person as you change, and also something which is just practical, because you don't want to be going around your life trying to think about all of this stuff consciously at the front of your mind.
I think when I conceptualize beliefs generally, humans naturally develop beliefs in an attempt to understand the world as it appears to them. It's a way to make sense of things, a way to take in experience and form some mental model of how the world really is, or how the world might be in your estimation. So I I guess when I think about this more, our beliefs influence our actions, and I think your point about change is where what I'm trying to get to here. Yes, we get comfortable in what we believe, and it's sort of easier to hold on to what we believed, because the other part of this is when you change a belief, you realize that you're wrong. And I think we've already talked about how hard it is for people to come to terms with being wrong, and that's the whole one of the whole points of our podcast here is this notion of like being okay with and actually embracing being wrong. So where I wanted to go ultimately, though, is that a lot of these beliefs are going to be based on our core needs, things that we we require to function in the world. And then they're also going to be based on fears that we have. And fear of change certainly is a thing that we're talking about here, but there's going to be all kinds of deep fears that are going to create beliefs in us about what we are or are not capable of. I thankfully, because of the sort of support system that I had growing up, even though I was born with a condition that makes me, legally blind, I'm like severely visually impaired. I never had, it would be very easy to have come to this belief about not having ability, being incapable. And I think that a lot of people with disabilities ha- do end up with beliefs like that. And they come from fears of not being able to do certain things, being incapable of doing things. And I think, again, I'm lucky to have developed kind of the opposite feeling, where I always framed my life in terms of capability. But ultimately, where I'm go again with all of this is like, yes, I think that it's hard to change our beliefs, but that's because they come from these places of our fears and our needs, and we get comfortable in facing the possibility that these beliefs we came up with to protect ourselves might need to be adjusted, and that we might have been wrong for a very long time about very important things. Like, that's not easy to accept, is I guess the point.
Of course, people will be stubborn as they are, but I think that becoming comfortable with being wrong is something that you should just become comfortable with in all facets of life. Learning in general is a process of just getting stuff wrong, and then realizing, okay, well, why did I get it wrong? What did I get wrong about it? And then, thinking, how can I not get that stuff wrong again? What lessons can I take from it? And I think that, building up the comfort with that is something that I still struggle with myself. It's a hard thing to do. It's such a hard thing to do. And sometimes it's easier than others, of course. But when when I try and think back about some of the best learning experiences that I've had in my life, it's when I've been perfectly fine with the fact that I was wrong in the first place. And I think that if you can sort of incorporate that as a part of your belief system, if you can sort of start to believe that being wrong is okay, then I think it stands to be a great strength. I don't think you should give up easily. I don't think that's what that means. I think there should always be, that level and part of you which is going to want to back up what you believe and fight for it. Of course, if you have evidence to fight for it, that's what you should use. You shouldn't just fight for an uninformed belief. I think that's also could be incredibly problematic and dangerous. But if you have something to defend, then defend it. Don't let yourself be easily swayed or convinced for no good reason. But being open to being wrong and having constructive discussions about why and what directions you could take, I think is all an incredibly healthy part of building a good belief system.
As ridiculous as it might sound, I personally have come to a point where I believe that I'm wrong about everything. And what I mean by that isn't that I just fundamentally don't understand anything. I guess where I'm coming from is a place of, I guess my beliefs are very pragmatic, in that I find that I have beliefs that are useful or beneficial regardless of their intrinsic truth. In other words, just because they may be wrong doesn't mean they aren't useful. Like, I can still apply these beliefs in the world to get the results I'm looking for, even if they're wrong. And that's okay. But believing that I'm always wrong leaves me open to the possibility that something else might come and be more useful or more beneficial than what I currently use.
That's an interesting way to look at stuff. I couldn't do that because I can't do things in extremes. I think just because I have like just an innate problem with extremes, but I think that taking it as an approach into certain things is definitely something that I'm gonna want to try. I think it's something fun, and it's a new way to try stuff. And of course, I literally had just talked about being open to changing your beliefs, and I think that's something that I think other people should maybe try too, because there is always a part of me which is like, well, if you've had a problem with being incredibly rigid and stuck, then yeah, maybe you do need to take it to an extreme to try and break break whatever wall that's in your way. However, I wouldn't lean on that too hard for too long, because then I think it starts to cause other problems. However, I like the way that you frame this because I've seen it work and I see it in progress all the time, and it's still informed. I think that's one of the important things. It's not taking this as an absolute of like yeah, literally I'm wrong about everything. It's kind of just a recognizing of the more you know, the less you know. There's always new things to learn. There's always new ways to look at things, and I think that's an incredibly open-minded way to look at life. And I think that it's powerful if you can utilize it well.
Well, it's actually really funny to me that you go to this place of, oh, I don't like extremes. I actually, I would be surprised if you didn't get that directly from things that I've said to you. Like I tend not to operate in places where it's not about extremes though. For me, again, yeah, I use the term absolutes, which you also just brought up there, and I think you were starting to see where I'm going to go with this, which is basically this has very little to do with me believing I'm actually absolutely wrong about everything. It's more like I don't believe it's possible to be right. I believe that there's only levels of utility that we can get from these beliefs. I just have a hard time with objective truth. And so it's literally I have this way of looking at things precisely because I have trouble with absolutes. Like I think this way not to be extreme, but to be aware and accepting of the fact that these absolutes can't exist. Absolute right or absolute wrong can't exist. So what I mean when I say wrong is literally are wrong. RONG. Like I'm just this is just my opinion about the world. Like no matter what I think, it's just my subjective experience. I'm not looking for an objective truth value in what I believe. I'm just asking about how well it works for me in terms of getting me where I want to go.
Well, as you mentioned, this idea of how well it works for you. You and me spent a little bit of time before this episode trying to come up with a model for how you could categorize beliefs because it was even something that you had said to me as we were doing this is it's like if you want to think about how you can create beliefs, you should try and think of ways that you can sort them and you can categorize them because having things scattered out and unsorted is an incredibly complicated way to live. So I will throw this to you as you came up with these three sort of pillars. And I don't want to take the credit for that, but I just simply as it is dive into it. Where do we want to start?
Cool. Yeah, I agree. I think this is a good introduction. Like, and I want to make the point that in the next episode, we want to be looking deeply at trying to identify our own core beliefs. And you and I will probably spend some time, during this week before we film that episode, doing these exercises, going through and trying to figure out our own core beliefs, and then being able to sort of report on that process and talk about that in more depth in the next episode. And so, in order to facilitate that, I wanted to come up here with a model of at least some simple model of beliefs, how we categorizing beliefs, where we can have something tangible to think about as we're trying to do this exercise so that we're not just because belief is just so broad. There's so many ways you could go with it. So this is also intended to be for listeners to take this model and try to do some of the same exercises for yourself in identifying your own core beliefs. Obviously, I think next week we'll have more to say on this subject, but if you want to try and follow along with what we're doing, this is sort of our process. So I want this model to be fairly simple. My mental models I usually like to be able to hold in my head. I don't want to have to write a bunch of things down or try to go back and find, oh, what is the model? How does the model work? I want to be able to keep it in my mind and come back to it and use it. I want it to be very very practical. I want it to be very effective for us. So it's fairly simple, but I think it does capture the essential kinds of beliefs you might have. And if you can find something that doesn't fit broadly in here, that's okay. And like think about maybe why you don't see it as fitting into one of these categories. It would be interesting to hear from people if they have this experience and to think about how they would categorize something like that. But let me present what we have thus far, which are three essential categories of beliefs. And I'm going to give sort of academic definitions first, and then we can think about really how we're using these terms. But I'd like to say that beliefs are going to fall into one of three essential categories. They're going to be descriptive, prescriptive, or evaluative. And each of those has again, sort of an academic meaning. Let's start with descriptive. These are literally going to be beliefs about nature, the nature of reality, existence, the universe, anything that explains sort of how things exist, how things are right now. They describe something about reality as we perceive it. Prescriptive are going to be the beliefs about how people should behave, what actions we should take, depending on the context, things that guide how we social order, how we organize ourselves, what our laws are. There are beliefs about how things should be, and then the evaluative beliefs are going to be related to the value of things, moral and ethical judgments, and sort of the. I'd like to think of it as the relationship between the other two. In other words, the relationship between how things are and how they could be. So that's sort of the mental model. If you just again take those simplified versions, the three pieces are descriptive, how things are; prescriptive, how they should be; and the differential, the difference between how things are and how things should be. Does that model sort of help you in conceptualizing what kinds of beliefs we might have about the world?
It absolutely does, and those sort of three practical ways which you described it, the how things are, how things should be, and the relationship between the two of them, was something that you stumbled across just before we started, and it was sort of that like, aha, this really is a good practical model to use. And to me, one of my first instincts was, huh, I can't find any belief that I have that doesn't fit to any of these three categories, being the academic definitions that you gave. And then you're like, well, okay, work backwards, see what happens. And I still couldn't. And then once you stumbled across these three, that was a wonderful aha moment, because it's simple. It's just an easy way to think about things. It doesn't take a whole lot of, digging through, a long paragraph of.
Explanatory material.
Exactly. It's pretty simple. It's very boiled down, and it's overarching. It's encompassing, and that's sort of the whole point. Is that if you can sort of recognize a situation. Let's take, maybe you've got a poor grade in a class, whatever poor is relative to your metric. I'll say, I've got a C in a class, and I'm trying to bring that up to a B plus or an A. I've got how things are. I've got my grade. I've got how things should be, or at least how I want them to be. And then I need to look at the discrepancy. What's going on? What's going wrong here? And then I can sort of take the action that I need to take in order to remedy those things. So not only is it a good way to categorize your beliefs, but it's also just a good way to try and take action based upon what's going on around you, which I think is also kind of cool.
I actually really like where you're coming from there, and I want to take your practical example even further. So let's use exactly that. I have a B in this class. That is a belief, right? It's also a fact. It's also like turns out to be something that is true in reality, like something that you could definitively point to and measure and say, look, there's the grade. It's in the computer. It says B, like for this class. That's fine. It's still a belief, right? But there's also, and that would be a descriptive belief. It's literally saying this is something about the state of the world, as you mentioned. This is how things are. Then there's how they should be, and again, like you're saying, how I want them to be. But should in your mind is it's the same essential thing. It's that same modal operator where we're really talking about the world. The ideal world is I should have an A. I would like an A, and that's how we want the world to be. That's our prescriptive belief. I believe I should have an A, and then you mention, yeah, now we have the evaluative case of going from the B to the A. And I would say that a belief that would fit into this category would be something along the lines of I am capable of improving my grade. That would be an evaluative belief. It's something about my innate ability to move things from where they are to where they could be. And this may not be, I feel like this model isn't perfect in the sense that it's not clear how that amounts to a judgment, but it is a judgment of yourself. It's a judgment of your capability. So I think again, this model may not be perfect, but it gives me a very clear way of categorizing these things, and just of thinking about them, because beliefs just thinking, what are my beliefs? Like, that's so broad, and it feels so ephemeral. I just wanted something tangible that could give us very concrete. I have a B. I should have an A. I believe I can change my grade for the better. Like that. Those are three different kinds of beliefs, and we now understand the difference between them, and we can think about other beliefs that would fit into those styles. It just gives us something to latch onto.
So what I really like and I want to say is that, said a couple of times, just trying to categorize beliefs is so incredibly broad. And I've come across as in recent times that one of the best things to do when something seems overwhelming or daunting is just to try and take a direction and see where it takes you. And I think this is a pretty darn good direction to go in. Simple, it's practical, it's not overcomplicated, and I mean whatever else I could say. But what I also like is that there's room within it to sort of wiggle and stretch the boundaries to kind of, like you said, judgment is pretty open. Maybe you want to take something else out of it, go ahead. But there's room to sort of build your own model within that model, right? You can sort of make it your own. You can personalize it a little bit. And I think it's, like you said, may not be perfect. However, if it's so imperfect that you can quickly realize flaws with it, then you can modify it. You can go in another direction. Maybe parts of it work, some parts of it don't. Take those parts that work, try and fill in the parts that don't. And then maybe, it's just like trying to build a puzzle. Except the puzzle is your belief system, which is always changing. So the puzzle should always be changing. And I think that's sort of what's cool about this. It's dynamic, and it's how belief should be. So the fact that it's not super rigid or concrete in all these ways, I think is sort of also the beauty of it. The fact that it's sort of open-ended and open to interpretation is one of the things that I think will make it so powerful once we put it into practice a little bit more.
It's really funny to me just because as you're saying that, I now am already applying this model in listening to your speech about, oh yeah, and that's how beliefs should be. Oh, he just gave me a prescriptive belief about beliefs. So there's already immediate practical value that I'm seeing from this. In any case, I think we've done a good job of tackling this subject to some level of detail that feels like we can take this in the next direction again, which is wanting to identify our core beliefs. And like you said, starting to put together this puzzle of who we are and what we believe. And yes, that puzzle is going to change, but core beliefs, realistically, your core beliefs aren't going to change a lot very often. So I think doing this mapping, taking the time to figure out what are some of our core beliefs, and then maybe like what are some of the beliefs that build on those core beliefs, but like starting with what are these core beliefs, if we can just do that exercise, that introspection, and try to start getting closer to understanding that, it will be very beneficial for us as we go deeper into this world of belief systems and try to really understand how to form beliefs and use them for practical value in the real world.
Absolutely. It's perfect. Literally, like you said, I've already just thrown that model at it. It's, we're going to be able to use this system to do X, Y, Z and evaluate our beliefs. It's like, yeah, you've got a descriptive belief right there. Perfect. Bingo, boom. It's kind of cool to see it already working. Is there anything else that you would like to go into before I take us down the home stretch?
Nah, take us away.
All right, perfect. If you guys enjoyed this episode, you can find more content just like this at The Wrong Idea on Instagram, TikTok, and X. And until next time, keep being wrong.
Got a thought that challenges the norm? We want to hear it. Post your wrong idea with the hashtag #WrongIdea. That's RONG idea. And join the conversation. Who knows? Your perspective might just be featured in a future episode. Remember, in a world of endless perspectives, all ideas are wrong ideas. Until next time, keep thinking, keep challenging, and keep embracing the unconventional.